what I would like to do is to present the work we have been conducting over the past decade towards sustainable land and soil carbon management in Laos and maize-prone areas, especially in the southern part of Xayaburi province and Xinjiang. So just for us, that's quite a good example of what we can call mining agriculture. So don't try to Google it on Wikipedia, because I think that's a kind of invention of French people. But the idea is to try to point out that mining is not only about extracting minerals from the soil, but also other elements. And we'll see how this agriculture is built on carbon depletion and carbon removal from the soil and nutrients. Then we try to present a little bit the work that we have tried to do with farmers to engage them into soil carbon-friendly practices. What are the lessons learned? It's kind of a long learning process, and we have this right now this experience of 10 to 15 years working with them on this topic. Then we tried also to discuss, to launch the debate on how we measure this soil carbon, because that's also. We see that there are different technology, different tools and approaches, but the costs are different. So what are the best suited technologies that could be applicable for our context, and then some take-home messages. So what do we call mining agriculture? And for us, it's the way to extract carbon and nutrients from the soil with limited to no restitution to the soil. And what happened over the 2 decades in the southern part of Xayaburi is a good example of that. So Xayaburi province, for those who knows, it's northwestern part of Laos, and we were particularly working in the 4 southern district of this province. And you can see on the right hand side that when you monitor the change in carbon stock, if you start with what is in the forest, the land cover, the initial land cover, we have about 150 tons of carbon per hectare, and in a period of 15 years. Then we have a soil carbon depletion of 70 tons of carbon per hectare, which is quite huge. So what are the drivers of this carbon change, carbon depletion? So they have what most people call local environmental factors with the climate, soil texture, and things like that. But what interests us is about the drivers that are related to human actions and to human activity. So the first one is about deforestation. So this is a map of land cover, land use change in the southern part of Xayaburi in between the 1990s and 2010. And so what you can see on the map, the green is the forest and the fallows, and the yellow are the cropland. And then what you can see is that we have 80,000 hectares of forest and fallows that disappeared, that were converted into cropland in a period of time of 20 years. And you can find this, again, if you try to correlate a little bit the carbon depletion with the production of maize, you find that. So you have a strong correlation between the increase in production of maize, with more than 380,000 tons of maize that have been increased in 15 years at the detriment of the soil carbon. So the other human-related drivers of carbon depletion is also the intensity of soil tillage and the disturbance that is made to the soil. What is quite well known right now is that the more you disturb the soil, the more carbon you lose. Right? So these are pictures of what is happening in Xayaburi. It used to happen, it's still happening in Xayaburi with plowing on steep slope with 4x4 tractors from top to down, and strong impact on land degradation with a lot of soil erosion. So other factors in this carbon turnover is about the input, the quantity of carbon input you can bring to the system. So that can be either crop residues, it can be green or animal manure, and so there is a strong relation between the more carbon you bring, the more accumulation you may expect. And so this is a simple scheme to see that on the left-hand side, with bare soil, no restitution, everything has been removed. You have more output, carbon output than input, so you have depletion. On the right-hand side, with a lot of cover crops and crop residues, you have more input and output, and then you have a process of carbon accumulation. So now, once it's said, and it is stated, what do we do with that, and how we try to engage the farmers into more sustainable practices? So we used to start work in Sayaburi and Xinhuang in the early 2000s. So from 2003 and 2009, two projects were associated there to try to make the promotion of conservation agriculture. So what is conservation agriculture? That is based on three main principles. The first one is to try to cover and permanent the soil. The second one is to try to reduce as much as possible the soil disturbance and the burning of the crop residues, and then to try to engage farmers into diversified cropping system, either intercropping, valley cropping, or rotation. So different things have been done at that time. So trying to use the local species, so especially the maize and the rice bean, the red bean that was used there in the southern part of Sayaburi. So working on maize residue retention, trying to work on 2 years rotation between legume crop and maize, or maize associated with different legume crop. Many works have been done also on small equipment to try to promote this no-till system. So hand jab seeder for smallholders, no-till planter for 2-wheel hand tractors, and then 4 lines for bigger tractors, and then up to more complex and diversified system using grasses and other biomass to try to increase the biomass that could have been given back to the soil, and so to try to engage into an accumulation process. So many documents on this experience in the southern part of Sayaburi that you can find also on YouTube. There is a 52 minutes documentary that is available on YouTube. You also have short videos on testimonies from farmers and technicians about this experience. So what out from this 5 years project was that there were some promising results at the plots, at the farm level, about soil carbon accumulation, but also gross margin, with a reduction of the cost related to the no use of plowing. So at plot scale and with model farmers. So in 2009 there were about 200 villages or 2,000 hectares on 40 villages. But then what we saw after the end of the project, a limited adoption and a limited dissemination of this cropping system after project end. So many studies have been conducted to try to understand why, what were the main constraints for adoption, and so different issues. The first one was about technical issues, with farmers finding some difficulties to manage multi-cropping systems, main crop with a secondary crop, risk of competition, the difficulty or the penability to sow in a mulch when you have a cover that you have to make a hole, to find a place where to put the seeds. And then different problems with rodents and insects that were attracted by the cover crops and things like that. But that was not the main issues. The main issues were much more related to economic and value change. For instance, for market for secondary crops. I mean, farmers were really to engage in diversification process, but they said you can produce anything unless there is a market for it. So they had this kind of rice bean niche market in the southern part of Sayaburi, but when you wanted to expand the area and the production, the traders were only interested in maize at that time. Then also in terms of value change, the access to equipment, basic equipment, especially the no-till planter, in terms of physical accessibility, but also in terms of price accessibility. And then there were a couple of organizational issues, and especially related to animal-free roaming. So most of you that are working in uplands, you know that there is this conventional regulation that you can find in the uplands about animal roaming. So animals are left roaming freely in the whole village territory after the harvest of the main crops, so rice, crops, cereals, and maize. And this free roaming process is a major constraint for the farmers who want to engage into really cropping or intercropping, because they need to protect their field against this freely roaming. And there were another factors that we call the windows of opportunity, that are the timing of intervention of the project. What you have below is the typical trend you can observe with a boom crop. So Sayaburi and Xinhuang, the boom crop of the maize. So you have an adoption phase, and then we have a fast and strong expansion and densification of the process up to a plateau, so where the area, the pollution is stable, and then starting to decrease, what we call up to the burst and the abandonment of the crop. So if you look at the figures about maize production in these two provinces, in Xayaburi and Xinjiang, so Xayaburi is in blue and Xinjiang is in red, you see this strong phase, initial stage of adoption and expansion of maize crop, started from less than 20,000 ton up to 4,000 ton of maize per year. And then the project was there during this phase, and it was quite difficult to find people listening in this mainstream. So it's quite difficult to have to propose alternative during when everything is good, the prices are high, the yield are good, and everyone is happy. So what we identified is that the main opportunity window for intervention was at this phase in red, when aftermath of the boom, when people are looking for alternative, when they are in what we call distress diversification process. So what did we learn from this initial experience is that we try to engage into more participatory landscape approach, trying to bring the people more into the design and the implementation of their own solution and their own development pathway. So the first step, so Dalla may talk about it better than me, is to try to use what they call this participatory land use planning, trying to have the whole village identifying the areas where they wanted to keep on with maize and the area where they wanted to give up and to turn into other alternative crops, just like livestock. And so that was a way to negotiate with them how we manage these rolling crop and residue to improve the soil carbon. Then we try also to make much more participatory in between the actors and to try to foster the interaction and the negotiation between players. I mean, it's difficult to have them shift from individual behavior to a collective one, back and forth. So we try to develop, Jean-Christophe is here and then he can bring some more experience about that, some role play game where we bring people with different assets and we try to see how they organize and they use these assets to in a defined village territory. So how they succeed in trying to define by themselves where they want to organize themselves for fencing, where they want to organize for reaching sufficient amounts to negotiate with traders and so on. The third point was about trying to facilitate value chain development. So trying to facilitate the negotiation, the contract farming process, the fair contract farming process in between the traders and the farmers. So for example, in Xinjiang right now, we try to organize the farmers with a local trader, which is interested in collecting and producing soybean for local processing for animal feed. We try also to work on cross-border value chain for all the secondary crops, mung bean, rice bean, soybean, groundnut, and so on. And we try also not to focus that much on no-till with all the problems encountered by farmers related to no-till management, but much more on diversification. Try to focus on diversification, increase use of legumes in the system, and then step by step, slowly, try to see how we can decrease the intensity of tillage. So what impact on soil carbon after 2 years working there, and what are the tools and approaches we try to develop to monitor this soil carbon? So you have different tools and approaches from low technology to high. Usually low technology, it's in situ visual assessment of the soil. This is what farmers are doing. They look at the color, so the darker it is, the richer in carbon it is expected to be. They try also, you can also smell the soil, and the more pungent, you have this strong, earthy odor, the richer the carbon can be. You can have also some simple visual assessment of soil erosion and degradation. So you have farmers saying sometimes stones are growing in my field, so you can assess also the gullies and the soil erosion process in your field. And then you have the classical lab analysis with dry or waste combustion, where you can have the total carbon or the total nitrogen of your plot. But so for the first one, the problem is that it's not calibrated, so it's difficult to compare with other situations, and it's depends a lot on who is observing. We had this problem with, we tried this soil test kit box, and which is based on colorimetry, so people are assessing the quantity of nutrients, of carbon, and then it depends on how much you see the color. Some people are seeing green, dark green, yellow green, or even red for some of them, so it's highly depending on the observer. On the other hand, if you want to take a large number of samples and to bring everything at the lab, it's going to cost quite a bunch of money, and it's going to take long. So what we try to do is to try to work on this in-between technology, and especially this one, the permanganate oxidizable carbon, which is a simple technology that allows to assess what we call the labile carbon, the carbon which is easily degradable by the microorganism in the soil. And PhD students have been shown that there is a strong relationship between this labile carbon, POX carbon, with the total carbon of the soil. So this is what we try to use as a proxy of the carbon in the soil. So these are simple and preliminary results. We have one agronomist working hard right now to collect samples in the north. But these are first results on POX assessment that was done two weeks ago in Xinhuang, Nadu village. And then you see that you have a trend. So from what we consider as the best soil carbon content, the forest, on the left, up to the maize monocropping, with in between the improved pasture. People are diversifying a lot into improved pasture of grass, and the maize associated with the rice bean. So there is this trend where we can see that with a simple step-by-step approach, introducing a legume, introducing a participatory approach, how to use the village territory, we can step-by-step improve the soil carbon. So some take-home messages. I think Buntanom will present a lot of experience from the VOCAT initiative. We have right now quite a lot of documentation on different technology and practices related to land and soil carbon preservation at plot and farm level. So you have here an extract of what you can find on the website of FOP 1000 initiative, with different kinds of no bare soil, hedgerows, grass strips, more improved pasture, reduce tillage, and so on. So we have a certain number of solutions, technical solutions, but they are still yet really seldom applied at large scale. And so why? So because we really believe that the successful adoption and adaptation at large scale of these soil carbon-friendly practices depend a lot on our capacity to engage the whole community, not only model farmers, but the whole community into the design, their own design and implementation of these practices, but not only also techniques and practices, but also new institution and organization rules. And just like regulation on forest preservation, not to expand cropland into forest, and then also regarding to animal grooming control. And beyond this bottom-up process, so there is also a question about what kind of policy can support also this change. We have this FOP 1000 initiative. What could be adapted for the Lao uplands? And this is something I hope we can share and debate later on. Thank you.